Right now we're out here on a windy day and we were just filming me casting the Aeroflex Salt 9'7" weight into a fairly gusty wind, intermittent wind. I was using a leader and a fly that would be realistic for what I would fish with a 7-weight rod. And so you can see I have my leader is going the whole length from my fly to the rod tip, and then it's in a guide and a half. So this is a 9'6" leader that I was casting there into the wind. And this leader has a butt section that carries a similar amount of energy as what the end of the fly line does. So this is an important thing when you want to cast into the wind or you want to turn over a heavy weighted fly. The transition point from where your fly line goes into your leader, here you can see we have a nice smooth transition where there's not a significant difference in the stiffness of the leader that's coming off of the fly line. And there's a concept with the taper that for me, when I'm casting saltwater type flies into the wind, I feel this really helps me be able to turn the flies over and create controlled presentations in different types of wind, different size flies. I have a leader that I built myself. It's a several part leader, but it has a steep stair-stepped transition. This is an 8-weight redfish cold, weight forward 8 floating scientific angler line. And in the back here, I have a 30-pound P-line Shinsi, which is a hard material butt section. So I have an all-bright knot coming right into the fly line. So there's no loops, there's an all-bright knot, and I've got 30, 25, 20, and then I have a loop where, for me, I use the loops because in saltwater situations, oftentimes with things like false albacore, you can catch a few of them, your line might get beat up, and the fishing happens so fast that you want to be able to quickly change your stuff out without changing the taper of the line. So that's why I use the loop to loop into. You could also use a tippet ring for that, and I actually do use the tippet rings in this same situation alternative to the loop. The loop isn't a critical part of it. The taper is. Having that steep stair-step taper, and especially having a butt section where you're not losing energy from how stiff the fly line is. As the fly line loop turns over, you want to transition into what your leader is without having some sort of an abrupt gap in the energy transfer, because where that messes you up is on the back cast. When you make a back cast and your loop is turning over, if you don't have integrity between your fly line and your leader, your line kicks over. And then as you start your forward cast, your fly has to come out of a weird position to get back in line with the fly line. And when you have a nice taper going from the fly line transitioning to the fly, as your fly line turns over, the line at the end turns over in a more gradual, controlled way that keeps everything more straight and true as you turn and start making the forward cast. And what that affects is your accuracy, but also it improves the amount of power and force that you create when you go to make that forward cast, because when the fly line and the leader are all straightened out together as they start to move forward, you maximize and you optimize the amount of power and force that you generate with the line as you drive it forward. And if your fly line turns over straight, but you have kind of slack in your leader as the fly goes around to catch up to it, that little gap in controlling the energy transfer can make for some of the small differences in accuracy and loop control that prevent you from being able to put the fly down right where you want it in the front cast. So we had a pretty gusty intermittent wind, and I was trying to cast a Aeroflex Salt 7-weight rod into that wind. It's a great rod to cast into the wind in general, but the reason that a rod can cast well in wind is oftentimes not because of how stiff the rod is, but because of how easily the rod can load and unload. Because when you're in the wind, the factor that controls the line is really the line speed, which comes from the way the rod flexes and unloads. So when there's no wind and you're able to really control what the line is doing, a really stiff rod is going to have the potential to create the most line speed. but it's going to be the most difficult rod when you can't control the line perfectly in the wind, especially at a shorter distance scenario. If you want to load the rod up to get the line under control, to make a quick cast to a target that's not that far away, that can be a really important part of saltwater fishing. When a fish shows up and you've got a visual target that you need to try to make a cast before the fish spooks when it's close to you. A lot of the fish that you catch in saltwater, especially shallow saltwater situations, that's the way it goes down. And being able to take something like a weighted fly, like a crab fly or shrimp that has a dumbbell eye on it, and get that fly moving under control and putting it down right where you want to quickly with minimal false casts, that's the difference between success and failure oftentimes in saltwater flats fishing, and in a lot of situations when the fishing is visual. Having a rod and a line match for the rod that allows you to get the rod bending very quickly while the line is close to you, but then not get too overwhelmed by the weight of the line as you get it moving out to the distance that you're going to fish. That balance, it's different for different people. It depends on the difference in our casting stroke and how we move the line around, but oftentimes it takes a little bit of an overweighted line to be able to be the perfect match for a rod to do that at the short to medium distances. So here I have this 7-weight saltwater Aeroflex rod, and the line on it is an 8-weight redfish line. The redfish 8-weight line has about a 30-foot head. And so that's a shorter line head. And even though the line is one AFTMA standard weight class heavier than what the rod is rated for, the short head allows the rod to not get too overwhelmed when you're making a longer cast by the overall weight, grain weight in the head. So, a 7-weight line is 185 grains at 30 feet, and an 8-weight line is 210 grains at 30 feet. It's not a huge gap in difference, and oftentimes we're adding, 50 to 100 grains more than what the AFTMA standard is when we're going to overweight a rod. So if you have a line that's not really overweighted in itself, like a redfish, and has a shorter head, and then you put that on a rod that has a rating for a lighter line, oftentimes it's not a huge, heavy load, but it's going to be a little bit extra weight when you're in close. And that's a great way of getting your line moving, creating line speed, and then feeling the flex where you have the line under control and you're hauling and you're able to kind of control your loop shape, not just get the line there, but control what it's doing, and then control turning over the leader, control turning over something like a weighted fly. So we just filmed a little bit of this. And it was during a period we had kind of thunderstorm clouds coming over, so I had heavy wind in my face, and I was using this rod with this 8-weight redfish line to really control getting the line moving in the wind and being able to pinch the loop shape down and kick over the weighted fly the way that I wanted to and have control of doing that. And that's, if you were fishing for permit or you're fishing for something like false albacore where you had quick opportunities at a moving target, that's the best way to accomplish, creating a successful cast and getting it there in the shortest amount of time. There is a situation where I underweight rods, and that's when I'm dry fly fishing and I have very little wind, especially if the flies are small and you've got technical fishing and the wind isn't blowing you around. That's a situation where I will underline a rod, and it takes the right rod action to accommodate a underlined rod, but the best rod actions, you can actually underline them and overline them, and they don't run into a certain point where they get too bogged down or kind of have like a hinge point where they cascade off the tip and then get wonky as you push the rod deeper. And that's an action that I design rods to have. My rod designs, like the Aeroflex Freshwater, Aeroflex Saltwater, Tactical Long, those are all types of rods that will accommodate lighter lines and heavier lines, and also a really wide range of casting strokes for different people. That, some might have a really powerful line hand, whereas they're hauling very hard and loading the rod down here. And some, might have a style where they keep their line hand right at their side and have a gentle casting stroke and hold their rod like they're holding a book under their arm. whatever works for you and what you enjoy is the way, to cast. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. And a really good rod design is going to work for a wide range of people and a wide range of line head shapes, grain weights, and taper styles. Most of the rods that I design are not intended to be underweighted. The real trend with the fly lines that are available today is adding more weight than the AFTMA standard weight. I like to be aware of what the AFTMA standard weight is, and I like a rod to be able to effectively load with the AFTMA standard weight line. But really, the way I'm designing rods these days, I design the rod for the minimal load with that AFTMA standard weight line and the ability to accommodate heavier grain weight options, something like a Titan taper, which is a common line in the industry. It's 2 AFTMA standard line weights over at that 30-foot point. And the reality is that people are gonna load a rod with lines that are that much heavier. So I start around that standard weight, make sure the rod action will load more towards the tip with that type of line, and then we'll accommodate further down the rod, being able to be pushed with, 1 or even 2 line weight over lines. Then also, that also includes being able to accommodate putting like a streamer fly on your 5 weight. The streamer fly, when you're casting that around, puts a lot more stress on a rod like a 5 weight that might be designed to cast smaller flies. But someone might want to do that with an all-around type rod like a 5 weight. So not just being able to accommodate those Titan style, heavier, overweighted lines, but also being able to accommodate those situations where you push the rod with bigger, heavier weighted flies. Those are both things that a rod needs to be able to effectively do. So I design the rods to be able to load with standard weight lines, load with heavier weight lines, and handle those bigger weighted flies and be able to accommodate all of that. So the reality with choosing lines for a certain rod is really there's a right line for you for the application, but it's not necessarily that there's a right line for you overall, unless you only do one certain thing with that rod. A good example of this is I went on a permit trip for the first time a couple years ago, and there were several different anglers there in the camp, different skill sets. And what I saw as we started going around and fishing for the permit, and that was the first time that I had done that, was a lot of people had a line that matched their saltwater rod for casting in a field where they had time to get the line moving. But then with how fast the shots came at the fish and with the wind, the people were not able to load the rods effectively, quickly at the short distances to make those shots. And the lines that it took as I had brought extra lines on the trip, we moved some lines around, we got people more situated with lines that would work for them in the situation with those weighted flies and with the wind and how fast those shots came. Everyone needed a heavier line. And so just casting your rods or trying to cast your rods in certain fishing situations, everyone there had a line that they could cast on their rod right up until they tried to make a quick cast in the wind with a weighted fly and make 3 false casts and get the fly 40 feet with, wind and different angles. Another thing, we're most comfortable casting probably in a small window of angles, but in saltwater fishing, the fish might be over there, they might be over there. And the reality is, the more easily you can load the rod and get the line moving with higher line speed because the rod is loading and unloading, the easier it is to accommodate direction changes. I am a fan of using utilitarian lines for specific fishing applications where they're going to work best. And this redfish 8-weight line on a 7-weight rod is a nice example of a kind of balanced combination of things that I can push the rod if I need to and generate that line speed, but I can also comfortably move the line around, not have it slam down on the water, and fish a wide range of flies with a line like this, depending on how I rig up that leader and how I taper the leader. I can fish a smaller fly with a longer, more gentle leader, or with this line I can fish a big fly like a mouse fly with a shorter, more abrupt leader. So sometimes you can find a line that's a really good balance for everything that you want to do with the rod, and sometimes you're doing something where you really need to pick out the right line that's going to optimize what your rod can do for that, situation, especially with things like destination fishing, where you've got a unique opportunity for something that you don't do every day, and you want to dial your equipment in to do what it's going to take for that specific type of opportunity. As far as testing lines go, I think it's nice to try different tapers, and it's nice to also try different line weights on rods. And so if you have a few lines on hand, I think it's a great thing to do just to see how a rod feels with lines that you already have before you go and start buying new lines to test with rods. And also, a lot of fly shops have a stable of tester reels with lines on them, a lot of the popular lines, and you might be able to take in a rod you already own and try a few different lines that the shop has rigged up on reels to help you pick out what taper of line works best for you, or what grain weight window might be the best load for you for the rod that you have. Every single line feels different, in my opinion, and some of them are going to match up a lot better for what you want to do, and different ones match up better for different people depending on what their casting, stroke is like. So it's a tough question to say what's, the best line. It's often the best line for you, or the best line for the situation, or it might be the best line for that rod for you, but it's hard to really pin down what that's going to be for everybody.